Happiness through curiosity on the Ranveer Show. Welcome to TRS Clips. Ukraine, Russia. What's happening now? As we are recording this, it's September 2022. What's happening in September 2022 other than assassination attempts on Putin and his core of leadership? And who's in charge of the assassination attempts? Is it obviously Ukraine? Or are we talking about something else?
Well, you're never supposed to know these things. It's always done via multiple proxies. So I'm sure Mr. Putin knows who's behind all this. It could be Ukraine. It could be like whoever is controlling Ukraine, Big Daddy of Ukraine. It could be. Most likely everything is being done overall as a US-Russia tussle. So whatever we are witnessing is various manifestations of that rivalry and that tussle, right? So the assassination attempt on Alexander Dugin, who is one of the major thought leaders in Russia, it unfortunately killed his daughter. So that obviously is a manifestation of the bigger US-Russia rivalry and enmity. Now, what's happening in Ukraine? Recently, we are seeing reports in the Western media, in social media, that the Ukrainians have launched a massive offensive on Kherson and various parts of various territories that the Russians had captured. And maybe, apparently, they have captured big pieces of territory. Can we rely upon these Western media reports? I'm not quite sure. Right? So what I do is I look at the whatever is unfolding on a month by month or quarter by quarter basis, and then at the end of every 3 months I look at the map. What's the map saying right now, and what is the entire 360-degree perspective of the media telling us? Because right now we are seeing the news reports only from the Western perspective. Even when it comes to India, Indian news channels, etc., they also essentially parrot the Western perspective. You will see 2-3 Indian channels that are covering geopolitics, especially the Russia-Ukraine conflict and the Taiwan angle also. They have certain reporters on the ground in the conflict zone. They are always in Ukrainian-held territory. You will never see an Indian reporter on Russian-held territory. Why don't they give us a balanced perspective? You will always see the Ukrainian perspective and the Western perspective.
Why don't they give us a balanced perspective?
Let's look at where the funding comes from.
Okay. So again,
Follow
it's
the
money.
Follow the money. All the media outlets are financed by from somewhere, by someone. Follow the money and we will know why it's happening, why what's happening is happening. Media and news today is always flavored. There is no plain vanilla news. It's always flavored in a certain direction. It's always slanted. All news in some way is propaganda today. And that's why it's so hard to understand what's really happening. And it's very, very hard for me to believe any one perspective. I try to get a complete 360-degree perspective. Even that is hard because now the entire media, whether it's social media, Twitter, Facebook, whatever, it's all slanted like 89% or 93% in favor of the West. You have a Chinese presence, but even the Chinese reporting cannot be trusted because it's all propaganda. So all news essentially is propaganda. That's why you have to look at it from a three month perspective.
And you have to be obsessed with a particular subject to really know the truth. Like you don't know what you don't know.
Yeah.
I was talking to some friends of mine and they asked me, what's my biggest learning from my career? I said this, that we don't know what we don't know. Like we don't know who's right, who's wrong. This is all just guesswork. But what do you do in a world like this as a human being? What's your suggestion? Twitter?
I would say look at every single possible source of information. There are certain underground sources of information which may even be more strongly biased, like for example, Telegram channels. Telegram channels are actually pure propaganda. But what you should do is look at the Russian propaganda, look at the Ukrainian propaganda, look at the American propaganda, look at all three angles, maybe even Chinese propaganda, and then try to use your intelligence, whatever you have. And if you have an understanding of the patterns of history and geopolitics, based on all of this data and with your understanding of the patterns, you can form your own picture. But it may not be completely correct, but you may get a better understanding from that. So that's what I would do. I typically don't follow the day-to-day proceedings of this war obsessively, but I do look at it from a big picture perspective, from a quarter-to-quarter perspective. So what I am seeing is that Russia is employing the good old tried and tested slow war strategy. In Ukraine. Their objective is to ensure that Ukraine is never a threat for them again. Ukraine was the second largest nation in Europe. It had an armed force, combined armed force, greater than France plus Germany put together. It was a massive threat for Russia, especially after the 2016 Maidan coup, which was a color revolution orchestrated by the US, completely undemocratic and unconstitutional removal of the elected government and replaced by an American puppet. We know that. Right?
Which is Zelensky?
It was Zelensky's predecessor, but now it's Zelensky. Zelensky is a better guy because he's a good actor. He's acting as the president. So that's what's happening. So the coup was the last straw for Russia. The coup meant that there was going to be a NATO presence right at Russia's borders. Imagine if Russia has a presence right on the American border at Mexico or Canada or Cuba. Would the Americans ever tolerate that? No. So it's the same scenario for Russia. They could not allow that to happen. It was a red line that simply they could not allow the Americans to cross. And that's why the conflict was triggered off. It's not an unprovoked conflict. It has a long history of provocations from the NATO side. And finally, the Russians, they also knew what was coming. And I'm sure they were preparing for this for the past 10 years. Right?
What's Putin's current state of mind according to you?
Putin is in survival mode. He knows that he has the entire might of the West arrayed against him. He knows that he has a very unreliable partner in Xi Jinping and the Chinese Communist Party. Russia and China are actually long-term enemies. They are long-term adversaries and very serious adversaries. But currently they are forced to cooperate because they have a bigger common enemy. So that is Mr. Putin's perspective. He has to juggle all these problems. He has this massive existential threat. The West would like to see nothing more than Mr. Putin assassinated and Russia broken up. Right? It's an existential threat. Just the way the Israelis have had an existential threat for the longest time. So that's the threat that comes from the West for Mr. Putin. And then there is Russia, which is an unreliable partner. The Russians would also want in the long term to see Russia annihilated. The Chinese. The Chinese would also like to see in the long run, once they deal with America, they would like to see Russia annihilated. And Russia and China have nearly gone to nuclear war in the past. In the 1960s, there was this massive border issue. There were very major border clashes, bigger than what we have with China. Hundreds of soldiers died on each side. The Russians had actually decided, they had taken the decision to nuke China. It is the Americans who intervened and said that this will lead to nuclear war. We will not allow you to nuke China. And that's why the Russians did not do that. So the Americans saved China. That border issue was later resolved, but that is simply a dormant matter. The Chinese will reopen it when they feel the time is right. So Russia and China are long-term adversaries. They simply cannot coexist together. When you have a common border, you cannot be friends.
What will happen if Putin actually dies?
He most likely will have a succession plan. It is paramount in any empire, in any nation, to have a clear plan of succession. Because if you don't have it, it's going to lead to civil war. So he will not announce it to the world, but he will most likely have chosen at least one or two people who will most likely succeed him. And his choice will be very clear. He doesn't want to have two people who are equally strong contenders. He will have made his line of succession very clear. We don't know who it's going to be. But in case he dies, I'm sure that he will have a successor ready to step into his shoes.
Thanks for watching. Make sure you check out the entire episode and also check out this playlist that we've curated just for you.